Even the windows are blown from neighborhood buildings. What kind of energy enabled this? Would fire hurl metal and concrete sideways into the air? Here, a 600,000-pound chunk of steel, twice the weight of a Boeing airliner, was flung 400 feet, wedging itself deep into 3 World Financial Center on Vesey Street. A FEMA photographer taking pictures of Ground Zero wondered why so many steel beams were jutting from neighborhood buildings. Watt shot pieces of the towers all the way across the street. In April 2006, New Yorkers were distressed to learn that bone fragments, human remains from 9/11, had been found on the roof of the nearby Deutsche Bank building.
And how, in God's name, did those fragments get there?
It surprised me that there was still bone fragments or human remains that had not been discovered.
How is it possible that after 5 years they're finally looking on the rooftops of the Deutsche building? I mean, that's crazy.
And bone fragments less than a centimeter long. How could they be so small?
Now, are you following along in your handout? We're like most of the way through the evidence of controlled demolition for the Twin Towers. That's the second handout, the first one being Building 7. Look at the explosions on the right. Streamers shooting up and out with explosive force, thick billowing dust and smoke with pyroclastic or heat-induced cauliflower-formed clouds. Look at World Trade Center 1. Up and out. The geometry is similar to that of fireworks, where explosive force is going against gravity and in all directions symmetrically, up and out. It's been referred to like a banana peeling. Fire doesn't do this. Are all the cut and exploded at once? Let's take a look.
Words of a senior blaster.
We blow the basement, all the columns in the basement. Then we crack it up at the top to get it started. We go every other floor all the way down. Every explosive has a timer on it. That's why it's controlled. When the columns go, each floor goes down and impacts the one below and keeps going.
Here's what demolition experts use in steel-framed buildings: the linear shaped charge.
It's a chevron-shaped or V-shaped charge that you can focus at a specific target, and it's lethal. It generates around 3 million pounds per square inch pressure at a speed, depending on the explosive inside the shaped charge, in excess of 27,000 feet per second.
Well, do we have columns in the World Trade Center that show evidence of shaped charges?
Were the underground explosions intended to blow out the Twin Towers' basements, followed by blasts heard inside the buildings of shaped charges slicing the core?
Because of the secondary explosion, we've got numerous people covered with dust from the secondary explosion.
Demolition pre-weakening usually takes place well in advance of the final blast, but at the World Trade Center, critical prep work might have had to occur in a very compressed time frame in the panicked aftermath of the plane strikes. These core columns were discovered after the collapse. The angled cut occurs in exactly the manner that shaped charges slice through steel beams to control the way they fall. Notice the hardened, once liquid metal. Was thermite used with the shaped charge?
The job of the shaped charge is to cut steel H-beams.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle, which, through a series of beams cut at the same angle, will tend to make the building shift over and walk.
More angled cuts from the World Trade Center steel. The shortest distance between 2 points is, anybody? Straight line. If you're going to be out there sweating your buns off as an iron worker cutting steel, are you going to cut diagonally? More angled cuts. And by the way, they used oxyacetylene torches to cut the steel in the aftermath of 9/11, not thermite torches. In other words, all the slag you saw on that other cut is not produced by oxyacetylene. Oxyacetylene is a fairly clean cut. Here's another angled cut, series of angled cuts. Now, the core columns in the World Trade Center are quite easily accessed from the elevators. Here's the whole floor plan up here. In red, we've blown up the core. This is down at the ground floor. All of the elevators are adjacent to all of the core columns. The core columns are can be accessed directly through the elevator shafts. We know that ACE Elevator was modernizing the elevators in the World Trade Centers during the 9 months prior to 9/11, and they're out of business today. I'm not saying they had anything to do with placing explosives. I don't know. I'm just pointing out the evidence and the possibility that there's access to the columns. And even on the upper floors where some of the elevators stop and you have utility closets or even some open office space up there, you can get into the floor system and crawl actually all through the floor without being detected by the occupants of the building. It looks to me, I'm not an expert in controlled demolition, but if you had charges, in addition to the thermite cutting charges, which cut the steel at these perfect 30-foot lengths that they fell to the ground in, ready for loading and shipment, you would need an explosive force large enough to disperse those columns at a second or half a second or millisecond after they were cut in order to cause them to land 500 feet away in these other buildings and blow everything up. Because remember, all of the floors were pulverized. All the building contents. We'll be looking at that in a moment. So there was access. And of course, wireless detonation is a common means. You don't have to run wires everywhere through the building. You can simply plant a device at each location. And at some point, you have to intuitively ask yourself, does this look like an explosive force? Or does it look like a gravitational collapse? All of these 20-ton beams cut individually, separated from each other, from bolted and welded connections. This doesn't happen with a gravitational collapse. All of these pieces, individualized. Look at this. Now, there's 2,700 people in both of these buildings that lost their life on 9/11. We need to acknowledge that as we're going through this material and honor them and their families by getting at an investigation which finds out what the hell happened. It's extremely important that we do this. And when you come up against a 9/11 debunker or government official or anybody, newscaster, that says we've already looked into that, it's not necessary, use the force and the power of the honoring of the dead in this building to give you the inspiration to move through this resistance that you're going to face in the world as you tell your friends about this story and as they think you're crazy because they haven't been through this presentation, they haven't seen the evidence. They have to see the evidence. You have to send them a video, a DVD,